I laid in bed, restless, my mind racing with the conversation from earlier that evening. Aaron's words echoed in my head. "Your family, Beth. Just let us build on Grandpa's land. We deserve it too." How could he say that? That land was sacred, meant for Grandpa's dream project, a community center where he could share his passion for woodworking with the neighborhood kids. It was his dying wish, and I intended to honor it. Aaron always had a way of making me feel guilty, like I owed him something. But this time it felt different, like he was taking advantage of our familial bond for his own selfish gain. I tossed and turned, replaying the scenario. What? That land was meant for Grandpa's dream project. I had protested, my voice trembling with disbelief. Aaron's words cut deep. "Come on, sis. We're not asking for much, just a small piece of that vast property. You know you can't handle all of it alone." Alone. The word stung. It had been 3 years since my husband passed, leaving me to manage Grandpa's carpentry business single-handedly. But I wasn't helpless, and I certainly didn't need Aaron's pity or his demands. Still, the nagging guilt persisted. Aaron was family, after all, and he had a point. The land was vast, and maintaining it was a constant struggle. Perhaps I could compromise, allocate a small portion for him to build on, while preserving the rest for Grandpa's vision. With a heavy sigh, I made my decision. I would hear Aaron out, but on my terms. Grandpa's dream would not be compromised, no matter what. A few days later, Aaron's wife, Ally, showed up at my doorstep, clutching a thick folder adorned with an architectural firm's logo. She barged in without so much as a greeting, her expression stern and unyielding. "Here are the blueprints," she announced, slamming the folder onto the kitchen table. "As you can see, we have everything planned out in meticulous detail." I opened the folder, my eyes widening at the elaborate designs. An entire mansion? But I thought we agreed on a modest house. Ally scoffed, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching in disdain. "Don't be ridiculous, Beth. We deserve a home that matches our status and success. This is non-negotiable." My throat tightened as I flipped through the pages, each one more extravagant than the last. Grand foyers, multiple wings, even a private theater. It was excessive, to say the least. "But what about Grandpa's dream project?" I protested weakly. "We can't just pave over the entire property for your palace." Ally's piercing gaze bore into me, her lips curling into a condescending smirk. "Oh, please, that silly little community center? It's time to let go of the past and embrace the future, Beth. Our future." Her words stung like a slap across the face. How dare she dismiss Grandpa's lifelong dream so callously? The very dream that had sustained his spirit through countless hardships. The dream he had entrusted to me on his deathbed. I opened my mouth to argue, but Ally held up a perfectly manicured hand, effectively silencing me. "Save your breath. This is happening, whether you like it or not. We'll be expecting the funds for construction within the month." With that, she turned on her heel and strode out, leaving me to stare helplessly at the blueprints that threatened to consume everything Grandpa had worked so hard for. My hands trembled with a mixture of rage and despair. How could they be so heartless, so utterly devoid of respect for the man who had taken me in and raised me as his own? Didn't our shared history mean anything to them? I slumped into a chair, the weight of their demands crushing me. It seemed that no matter how hard I fought, they would always find a way to strip me of my dignity, to trample over the legacy that meant everything to me. But as the initial shock subsided, a familiar fire began to burn within me, the same fire that had fueled Grandpa's determination in the face of adversity. I would not let them win, not without a fight. It was time to take a stand, to protect the dream that had shaped my very existence. With renewed resolve, I gathered the blueprints and began formulating a plan. If Aaron and Ally wanted a battle, they would get one, and this time I intended to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The next morning I found myself at the hospital, visiting my ailing father John. As I approached his room, I overheard Ally's shrill voice echoing in the hallway. "It's just so awful, isn't it? But until he's gone, we can't get what's truly ours." My heart sank as the meaning of her words registered. She was talking about Dad's inheritance. My inheritance, the one tied to Grandpa's land and his dream project. I peered around the corner, and there she was, phone pressed to her ear, oblivious to my presence. Her face was twisted into an expression of pure disgust, as if the very thought of my father's existence repulsed her. I know, she continued, her voice dripping with impatience. But the sooner he kicks the bucket, the sooner we can finally live the life we deserve. No more scraping by, no more sacrifices. My hands balled into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. How could she be so callous, so utterly devoid of human decency? This was her own father-in-law she was talking about, a man who had welcomed her into our family with open arms. Bile rose in my throat as the full weight of her words hit me. She wasn't just after Grandpa's land, she was after everything, every last penny of our inheritance, and she was willing to wish death upon my father to get it. In that moment, something shifted within me. The anger, the resentment, the overwhelming sense of injustice, it all crystallized into a single, unwavering purpose. I would not stand idly by while these vultures picked our family legacy apart, piece by piece. Ally finally noticed me standing there, her eyes widening in surprise. Beth, I didn't see you there. Save it, I spat, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. I heard everything. Her face paled, but she quickly regained her composure, her lips curling into a sickly sweet smile. Oh, you know how it is with family matters. Things get said in the heat of the moment, but we don't really mean them. Don't insult my intelligence, I growled, taking a step towards her. I know exactly what you and Aaron are up to, and I won't let you get away with it. For a brief moment, her mask slipped, revealing the true ugliness beneath. Her eyes narrowed, her mouth twisting into a sneer. You can't stop us, Beth, she hissed. We're going to take what's rightfully ours, whether you like it or not, and there's nothing you can do about it. With that, she brushed past me, her shoulder colliding with mine in a deliberate show of dominance. But I barely registered the physical contact, my mind already whirring with determination. This was war, plain and simple, and as I stepped into my father's room, my resolve hardened. I would protect our family, our legacy at all costs, no matter what it took. A few days later, Aaron and Ally showed up at my doorstep once again, this time with a smug look on their faces that immediately set me on edge. We've done the math, Aaron announced without preamble, and to cover the construction costs, we'll need you to fork over $150,000. I stared at him in disbelief, certain I had misheard. $150,000? For a single house? Allie rolled her eyes, as if I were a petulant child questioning the obvious. Don't be dense, Beth. This is a mansion we're talking about, not some run-of-the-mill hovel. The materials alone are going to cost an arm and a leg. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the outrageous figure. Even if I liquidated every asset and drained my savings, I'd barely scratch the surface of that amount. That's an unreasonable demand, I protested weakly, already sensing the futility of my words. Aaron's expression hardened, his eyes glinting with barely concealed contempt. Don't give us that crap, sis. We both know you've got Grandpa's inheritance money stashed away somewhere. You owe us at least that much for agreeing to this whole thing. Ally nodded vigorously, her perfectly coiffed hair bouncing with each emphatic bob of her head. Exactly. It's time to stop being so damn selfish and start sharing the wealth, Beth. We're family, after all. The word family felt like a slap in the face, twisted and perverted beyond recognition by their insatiable greed. How could they claim to care about familial bonds when they were so willing to trample over everything our grandfather had held dear? I need some time to think this over, I stammered, my mind reeling from their audacity. Aaron shrugged, already turning to leave. Fine, take your time, but we expect that money in full by the end of the month, no excuses. As they walked away, I couldn't help but feel like I was being backed into a corner, forced to choose between preserving my grandfather's legacy and appeasing the insatiable appetites of these two vultures. But deep down, I knew there had to be more to their story. Some hidden agenda or ulterior motive driving their outrageous demands. They were playing a game, and I was determined to figure out the rules before it was too late. With trembling fingers, I transferred a lump sum of $20,000 into their account. A token gesture to buy myself some time. Then I made a call to an old friend of my grandfather's, a private investigator who owed him a favor. I need you to dig into Aaron and Ally's finances, I said, my voice steady and resolved. There's something they're not telling me, and I intend to find out what it is. This was just the beginning, I knew, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that I might be able to turn the tables and reclaim what was rightfully mine, and honor my grandfather's memory in the process. A week later, the private investigator I'd hired called me with some startling news about Aaron and Ally's finances. "Well, it's not looking good for them," he said without preamble. "Their business is deep in the red, and they've been defaulting on loan payments left and right." My heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. So that's why they were demanding so much money from me. Exactly, he confirmed. And get this, they recently booked an extravagant vacation to the Bahamas, blowing through what little savings they had left. White-hot fury coursed through my veins as the full extent of their betrayal became clear. They had no intention of using my inheritance to build their dream home. They were simply trying to dig themselves out of a financial hole of their own making, all while living it up on a lavish tropical getaway. Those lying, manipulative snakes. I seethed, my hands balling into fists. They were playing me this whole time, trying to bleed me dry for their own selfish gains. The investigator let out a low whistle. "You got that right. And from the looks of it, they were planning to skip town after draining your accounts, leaving you high and dry." A sudden thought occurred to me, and I felt a rush of determination unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Not if I have anything to say about it. Without another word, I hung up the phone and immediately called my old friend Ron, a seasoned lawyer who had worked closely with my grandfather over the years. "Ron, I need your help," I said, laying out the entire sordid tale of Aaron and Ally's deceit. "They've been trying to swindle me out of my inheritance, and I want to make sure they pay for what they've done." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Ron spoke, his voice laced with grim resolve. "Say no more, Beth. We're going to make sure those two get what's coming to them, and protect your grandfather's legacy in the process." Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly, poring over legal documents and crafting an ironclad plan. By the time Aaron and Ally returned from their ill-gotten vacation, everything was in place. Their smug grins quickly faded when they saw the construction crews hard at work on the property, but not on the palatial mansion they had envisioned. "What the hell is this?" Aaron demanded, his face flushing with rage as he stormed over to where I stood, arms crossed defiantly. "This is your dream home, brother dear," I replied, unable to keep the satisfaction from creeping into my voice. "A brand new community center, just like Grandpa always wanted." As realization dawned on their faces, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. The tables had finally turned, and this time I was the one holding all the cards. Aaron's face turned a deep shade of crimson as he lunged towards me, his hands balled into tight fists. "What the hell is this? This isn't what we agreed upon." I stood my ground, unflinching in the face of his rage. "On the contrary, brother dear, this is exactly what we agreed upon, or rather, what I agreed to." Ron stepped forward, brandishing a thick stack of documents. "The final signed contract is for the construction of a community center on this property. Beth owns the land outright, and she has every legal right to proceed with her grandfather's vision." Ally's shrill voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You can't do this. We had a deal." "A deal?" I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "You mean the deal where you tried to swindle me out of my inheritance to fund your lavish lifestyle? The one where you wished for our own father's death just so you could get your grubby hands on his money?" Their faces drained of color as the truth hung in the air, laid bare for all to see. In that moment, they looked small, pathetic, the facade of their supposed success crumbling around them. "How did you?" Ally stammered, her voice trembling with fear. "I have my ways," I replied coolly, "and thanks to your little confession at the hospital, I have all the evidence I need to make sure you never see a single penny of our family's money." Aaron's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a snarl. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours." With a flick of my wrist, I produced my phone and hit play, Ally's damning words filling the air like a noxious cloud. "It's awful, isn't it? But until he's gone, we can't get what's truly ours." Silence hung thick in the air as the recording ended, the weight of their betrayal crushing down upon them. Aaron's shoulders slumped in defeat, while Ally buried her face in her hands, her perfectly manicured nails doing little to hide her shame. "You're ruined," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Both of you. Your greed has cost you everything." As if on cue, a sleek black sedan pulled up, and two imposing figures emerged. Aaron's boss and a representative from the loan company they were in debt to. "Aaron Carter," the boss bellowed, his face twisted in disgust. "I've just been made aware of your extracurricular activities. Consider yourself fired, effective immediately." The loan representative stepped forward, brandishing a stack of papers. "And as for you, Mrs. Carter, we'll be initiating foreclosure proceedings on your home and assets to recoup the outstanding debts. You're both officially bankrupt." As they were led away, defeated and humiliated, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet triumph. They had brought this upon themselves, allowing their greed and selfishness to consume them until there was nothing left. And as for me, I had preserved my grandfather's legacy, ensuring that his dream would live on long after those who sought to destroy it were nothing but a distant memory. In the aftermath of Aaron and Ally's public humiliation, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The storm had passed, and I had emerged victorious, but at what cost? As I sat alone in the silence of my grandfather's woodshop, running my fingers over the smooth, worn surface of his workbench, I couldn't help but wonder if he would have approved of the lengths I'd gone to protect his dream. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my reverie, and I turned to see Ron standing in the doorway, a somber expression on his face. "Beth," he said, stepping inside, "I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I think you did the right thing." I let out a weary sigh, my shoulders slumping under the weight of my conflicted emotions. Did I, though? I mean, I practically destroyed my own brother's life. What kind of person does that make me? Ron's brow furrowed as he considered my words. "A person who was willing to do whatever it took to preserve her family's legacy," he said finally. "Aaron and Ally brought this upon themselves with their greed and deceit. You simply leveled the playing field." His words rang true, but still, a part of me couldn't shake the nagging sense of guilt. These were people I had once loved and trusted, after all, family. As if sensing my inner turmoil, Ron reached into his briefcase and produced a small recording device. "I think you should hear this," he said, pressing play. Ally's voice filled the room, her tone dripping with disdain as she spat the words I had overheard at the hospital. "It's awful, isn't it? But until he's gone, we can't get what's truly ours." I flinched, the memory of those words still fresh and raw, like a jagged shard of glass piercing my heart. But then Ron rewound the tape and played it again, this time with the full context. "And that's why we need to sort out this mess with Beth before Dad passes away. It's awful, isn't it? But until he's gone, we can't get what's truly ours, a chance to make things right and honor Grandpa's legacy." My breath caught in my throat as the true meaning of her words sank in. They hadn't been wishing for our father's death at all. They had been lamenting the fact that they wouldn't be able to make amends until after he was gone. Tears stung my eyes as the weight of my mistake came crashing down upon me. I had let my anger and suspicion blind me to the truth, lashing out in a misguided quest for vengeance. "Oh, Ron," I whispered, my voice thick with remorse. "What have I done?" But even as the guilt threatened to consume me, a glimmer of hope shone through. Aaron and Ally's lives might have been shattered, but they were still alive, and there was still a chance, however slim, to make things right. With renewed determination, I turned to Ron, my jaw set in a firm line. "We need to find them," I said, my voice steady and resolute, "and we need to make this right, no matter what it takes." The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I had a sense of purpose, not just to preserve my grandfather's legacy, but to heal the deep wounds I had inflicted upon my own family. It was time to find redemption, one painful step at a time. It took months of searching, but eventually, Ron and I managed to track down Aaron and Ally. They had hit rock bottom, living out of a dilapidated motel, scraping by on menial jobs just to put food on the table. When I first laid eyes on them, huddled together in that dingy room, it was as if the weight of the world had come crashing down upon their shoulders. Aaron, once so full of swagger and bravado, now looked small and defeated, his eyes hollow and haunted. and ally, who had always carried herself with such poise and confidence, was a mere shadow of her former self, her once immaculate appearance now disheveled and unkempt. For a moment I wavered, the old anger and resentment threatening to resurface, but then I remembered my purpose, redemption, healing, and the chance to make things right. "Aaron, ally," I said, my voice steady despite the tumult of emotions raging within me. "We need to talk." They regarded me warily like cornered animals, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt at the fear and distrust etched onto their faces. "What do you want from us?" Aaron spat, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Haven't you taken enough?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "I want to apologize," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I made a terrible mistake, and in my quest for vengeance I let my anger blind me to the truth." Ally's brow furrowed, confusion and skepticism warring across her features. "What are you talking about?" Slowly, I recounted the events that had led me down this path, the misinterpreted conversation, the assumption of their ill intent, and the devastating consequences that followed. As I spoke, their expressions shifted from guarded to stunned, the realization of my mistake dawning on them like a cruel twist of fate. "Beth," Aaron breathed, his voice barely above a whisper, "we never meant for any of this to happen." Tears stung my eyes as I nodded, the weight of my guilt threatening to crush me. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "and I am so sorry." In that moment something shifted between us. A wall built upon years of resentment and mistrust began to crumble. Ally reached out, her hand trembling, and took mine in a gesture of tentative forgiveness. "We were all blinded by our own desires," she said, her voice tinged with regret, "but that doesn't excuse what we put you through." And just like that, the floodgates opened, and we poured out our hearts to one another, laying bare the pain and misunderstandings that had festered for far too long. It was a cathartic release, a cleansing of the soul that left us all drained but oddly at peace. As the sun began to set outside the grimy motel window, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that our journey was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more wounds to heal, and more bridges to mend. But in that moment, surrounded by the love and forgiveness of my family, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't experienced in years. Grandpa's dream had been realized, his legacy preserved, and now with Aaron and Ally by my side, the future looked brighter than ever. "We're going to get through this," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "Together." And as we embraced, a newfound bond forged in the fires of our shared tribulations, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them as a united front, a family, whole and unbroken, standing tall in the face of adversity. For in that moment, I had found something far more precious than any inheritance or material possession, the true meaning of redemption and the unshakable power of love to heal even the deepest of wounds. I could feel the anger boiling inside me as I listened to the lewd sounds coming through Brent's phone speaker. My husband's deep, throaty groans intermingled with the unmistakable high-pitched gasps of a woman who definitely wasn't me. "Oh, Brent, you feel so good," the woman purred, her voice dripping with lust. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, but I forced myself to remain still and silent, clutching the device tightly as waves of nausea washed over me. When the call finally ended, I took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting back tears. How could he do this to me? To our family? After 15 years of marriage and giving him everything, this was how he repaid my devotion? The lies, the business trips, the unexplained credit card charges, it all made sense now. My heart pounded with a mixture of rage and devastation as I confronted the harsh reality. Brent was having an affair. I spent the rest of that night pacing restlessly, my mind racing as I replayed the sordid conversation over and over. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and hurl accusations. But the other part knew I needed to stay calm, to gather evidence before he inevitably denied everything. When Brent finally returned home 2 days later, I steeled myself, forcing a tight-lipped smile as he bounded through the door with his usual charisma. "Hey, babe, I missed you." He pulled me into an embrace, his aftershave filling my nostrils and making me gag silently. I returned the hug stiffly, all the while imagining wrapping my hands around his lying throat and squeezing until his deceptive tongue lolled out. Everything okay? He asked, sensing my tension. His concerned facade only fueled my fury. Just tired? I lied smoothly, mirroring the ease with which he'd clearly been deceiving me. Welcome home. As he headed upstairs to shower, I felt a surge of resolve coursing through me. I would uncover every sordid detail of Brent's betrayal. And when I did, he would face the consequences, severe, brutal consequences, for shattering the sacred vows he had sworn to me. Brent's carefree whistling echoed down the stairwell, but I heard only the faint rumblings of karma's approach, slowly gathering like an inescapable storm on the horizon. I took a deep breath and steeled myself before entering the living room. Phone in hand with the damning recording queued up, Brent was lounging on the couch, idly flipping through channels. "We need to talk," I stated firmly. He glanced up with a bemused expression. "What's up, babe?" Rather than answering, I hit play on the audio file. The unmistakable sounds of his aroused groans and the mystery woman's breathy moans filled the air. Brent's face drained of color as the recording played. When it finished, I fixed him with a cold stare. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" He opened and closed his mouth wordlessly for a moment, before regaining his composure. "Candace, that was just a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that was a one-time slip-up?" Brent rose from the couch, hands raised placatingly. "Baby, I swear, it was nothing but a drunken fling during that conference in Phoenix. It'll never happen again." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, nostrils flaring. "I know about the hotel receipts, the suspicious credit card charges. How long has this been going on?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, you've got it all wrong." "Save it," I cut him off, feeling disgusted. "I can't even look at you right now." Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, slamming the door to the guest bedroom behind me. I collapsed onto the bed, hot tears of anger and humiliation streaming down my cheeks. How dare he try to gaslight me, to make me feel crazy for catching him red-handed? My body shook with rage at the thought of all the lies, all the times he had smiled in my face while carrying on a tawdry affair behind my back. But I refused to be the victim anymore. I would expose Brent for the unfaithful snake that he was, gathering undeniable proof to shove in his smug face. Over the next few weeks, I documented everything, poring over bank statements, installing tracking software on his phone and computer, even hiring a private investigator to follow his movements. The evidence mounted rapidly. Hotel receipts, incriminating emails and texts, even video footage of him kissing and groping the woman, who I learned was his co-worker Amber, in a dimly lit parking garage. When I finally amassed the extensive file, I waited until Brent was home from another one of his frequent business trips. Dylan was spending the night at a friend's, giving us privacy. "We're through," I stated coldly, tossing the thick manila envelope onto the coffee table in front of Brent. "I know everything." His eyes went wide as he flipped through the photos, videos, documents, and other proof within. "Candace, I can explain." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save your breath. The lies stop now." For the first time, Brent seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing or exaggerating. The smug mask slipped, revealing the cowering coward underneath. What are you going to do?" he asked meekly. A vindictive smile crossed my lips as I leaned back in my chair. "Don't you worry," I purred darkly. "You're about to face some severe consequences." Despite the mountain of evidence I had gathered proving his infidelity, Brent continued to deny and downplay his affair with Amber. Lie after shameless lie poured from his mouth as he desperately tried to gaslight me into doubting the truth right in front of my eyes. "It was just a fling, a stupid mistake," he would claim, as if that absolved him of betraying his marriage vows. Other times he would insist, "We're just friends. There's nothing going on." I wanted to scream at the blatant falsehoods. How dare he treat me like an imbecile after I had caught him red-handed? Part of me was tempted to leak the evidence online for the world to see, to utterly humiliate him. But I held back, knowing I needed to bide my time for the perfect moment to strike. In the meantime, I began compiling an even more extensive file on Brent's misdeeds. I installed hidden cameras and microphones around the house, recording his every move. Our teenage son Dylan even helped, using his tech skills to hack into Brent's emails and messaging apps. "I can't believe Dad would do this," Dylan said sadly one day after uncovering yet another explicit exchange between Brent and his mistress. I pulled my son into a tight hug, my heart breaking for the disillusionment he was experiencing at such a young age. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way," I told him gently. "But we can't let your father's lies tear this family apart. We have to fight back." Dylan nodded resolutely. "Don't worry, Mom. We're going to take that cheating scumbag down." With my son's help, the file on Brent's indiscretions grew thicker by the day. Incriminating photos, videos, emails, credit card statements, we collected it all, documenting his every transgression in preparation to obliterate his life. But still, Brent persisted in lying through his teeth whenever I confronted him, doubling down on his fabrications with almost sociopathic ease. "You're being paranoid and crazy," he would snap whenever I tried to reason with him. "There's no one else, you're imagining things." The gaslighting was maddening, making me question my own sanity at times despite the overwhelming proof I possessed. How could someone I had loved and trusted for so long deceive me so callously? The final straw came at Brent's family reunion over 4th of July weekend. As we mingled with his relatives at the backyard barbecue, I watched in horrified disgust as he blatantly flirted with Amber right in front of me, his wandering hands leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Rage boiled in my veins as I stormed over and shoved him away from the smirking woman. "Get your hands off my husband, you home-wrecking whore!" I shouted, the vicious words ripping from my throat before I could stop them. Brent tried to defuse the situation, laughing it off as a misunderstanding to his oblivious family members. But I was done playing his game. Grabbing the thick file from my purse, I flung it down on the picnic table, photos and documents spilling out, displaying the lurid evidence for all to see. "Take a good look, everyone," I spat venomously, whirling on my astonished in-laws. "This is the kind of man your son really is, a lying, cheating scumbag who's been having an affair with this woman for over a year." Pandemonium erupted as Brent's relatives gasped and shouted in shock and anger. But I didn't care. I was past the point of protecting him or preserving his pristine reputation. He had made his bed, and now it was time to lie in it, no matter how publicly humiliating the consequences would be. The backyard erupted into chaos as I exposed Brent's sordid affair to his entire family. His parents and siblings recoiled in shock and disgust, gawking at the incriminating photos and documents strewn across the picnic table. "How could you, Brent?" his mother wailed, burying her face in her hands. "After everything your father and I did for you." Brent's dad shook his head slowly, a look of utter revulsion on his weathered face. "You're a disgrace, son. I didn't raise you to be this kind of man." But Brent didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He simply sneered at me with contempt blazing in his eyes. "You crazy bitch," he snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You're going to regret this." Before anyone could react, he lunged across the table and grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking me towards him until our faces were mere inches apart. The stench of beer and barbecue sauce wafted from his mouth as he hissed, "You think you've won? This isn't over." I stared defiantly into his crazed eyes, refusing to show fear despite my heart thundering in my chest. "I'm done with your lies, Brent. Our marriage is over, and so are you." Dylan suddenly appeared, shoving his father away from me with surprising force. "Get your hands off her!" he shouted, positioning himself protectively in front of me. Brent stumbled backwards, nearly toppling the table with the evidence in his drunken rage. Amber was at his side in an instant, clinging to his arm. "Come on, baby, let's get out of here," she crooned, shooting me a smug look over her shoulder. A chorus of outraged shouts and insults followed them as they stormed away. Brent's brother Chris stepped towards me, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'm so sorry, Candace," he murmured, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "If we had known, this is unforgivable." I nodded mutely, fighting back tears as the gravity of the situation hit me. My life as I knew it was over, but it was a life built on lies and deceit anyway. As much as it hurt, I knew I was doing the right thing. In the days that followed, the rest of Brent's family reached out in turn to express their shock and lend their support. Even his own parents, initially defensive of their son, came to realize the extent of his betrayal as they pored over the damning proof I had gathered. We had no idea he was capable of such depravity, Brent's mother told me, her voice laced with a heartbroken waver. You didn't deserve any of this. I accepted their apologies stoically, appreciative of their kindness, yet numb to offering any absolution for Brent's actions. As far as I was concerned, he had committed the ultimate sin by breaking his sacred vows, and he would pay dearly for it. True to his vile nature, Brent remained utterly unrepentant in the aftermath of his exposure, attempting to gaslight and manipulate me into doubting the truth yet again. You're blowing this way out of proportion, he claimed during one heated argument, his arrogance infuriating. It was just a fling, it's not that serious. I could barely contain my fury as I hurled his words back in his face. Not that serious? You disrespected me, your family, our entire marriage vows, all for some cheap fling with a woman you couldn't even be faithful to. Brent's eyes narrowed to slits as he stepped towards me, his body tensed with menace. You'll regret this, he growled, each word dripping with venom. I'm going to make you suffer for humiliating me like this. But I refused to be intimidated by his empty threats any longer. I had the truth on my side now, along with his own flesh and blood, who had disowned him for his disgusting misdeeds. No, Brent, I replied coldly, staring him down with flinching. The only one suffering will be you. I'm going to destroy every single part of your pathetic life, and I'm going to make sure you deserve every agonizing second of it. After the explosive confrontation at Brent's family reunion, there was no going back. The bridges had been burned, the truth laid bare for all to see. His parents disowned him, his siblings wanted nothing to do with him, even his own flesh and blood had turned their backs in utter disgust. But Brent didn't seem fazed by the fallout. If anything, he seemed to revel in the chaos, lashing out with bitter vitriol and doubling down on his reprehensible behavior. They're all a bunch of self-righteous hypocrites. He sneered when I informed him that his parents were cutting him off financially. I don't need their money or their fake love. His callousness was appalling, devoid of any remorse for the devastation he had wrought. It became increasingly clear that appealing to his humanity was a fruitless endeavor. He simply had none left. As the divorce proceedings began, Brent fought me viciously on every front, determined to make me suffer, even as the world crumbled around him. He drained our joint accounts, attempted to hide assets, and even leveled false accusations in an effort to turn our son Dylan against me. Your mother's a lying, vindictive snake, he hissed, after I caught him trying to manipulate Dylan. Don't let her turn you against your own father. But Dylan wasn't having any of it. Now 17, he had witnessed firsthand the depths of Brent's depravity and betrayal. If anything, it had strengthened the bond between my son and I, a united front against his father's toxic influence. I don't know who you are anymore, Dad, Dylan said sadly, shaking his head. But I want no part of this ugliness. With each despicable act, each pathetic attempt to drag us all down with him, my rage toward Brent calcified into an icy, simmering hatred. I found myself obsessively strategizing, plotting out every move to obliterate him, financially, socially, psychologically. It became my singular driving force, a all-consuming quest to make him feel even an ounce of the pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me and our family. Brent's smug arrogance would be his undoing. I would savor every moment of stripping that away as he lost everything. When the judge ultimately ruled in my favor, awarding me the house and primary custody of Dylan, Brent remained defiant, even as his life crumbled around him. This isn't over, you psychotic bitch, he snarled, spittle flying as he was led away by the bailiffs. I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me. His threats might have once filled me with dread, but now I simply laughed in his bloated, twisted face. Regret? I called out mockingly. I'm just getting started, Brent. This is only the beginning of what you deserve. And I meant every word. Exposing his lies and driving away his family and friends was just the opening salvo. I had so much more in store for the man who had so callously shattered the sacred vows between us. As I watched him being dragged away, I felt a savage sense of satisfaction, of karma being served, however cruelly. This was precisely what he deserved after the turmoil and devastation he had wrought with his selfish actions. Turning away, I wrapped an arm around Dylan's shoulders, the two of us standing united against the storm Brent had unleashed through his sins. There would be no remorse, no looking back. only the total and complete obliteration of the man who had dared to betray our family's trust in the most unforgivable way. Whatever revenge lay ahead, he had more than earned every agonizing second of it. With the divorce finalized and Brent out of our home, I could finally turn my full attention to systematically dismantling every aspect of his miserable life. He thought he had been through hell already? He had no idea what fresh agonies awaited him. My first target was his career at the prestigious corporate firm where he had been employed for over a decade. Brent had always taken immense pride in his position and paycheck, lording his success over others as proof of his importance. Well, it was time to strip that arrogance away once and for all. Utilizing the evidence I had gathered of his affair with Amber, I compiled a comprehensive file documenting how he had been neglecting his duties and misusing company resources to facilitate his indiscretions. Explicit photos, video recordings, emails, all of it, tallying up the sordid details of his unprofessional conduct. I also enlisted the aid of an old friend, a skilled hacker who owed me a favor, to covertly access the company's internal communications and HR files. With his help, I was able to insert the incriminating dossier directly into their systems, ensuring it would be found. Within a week, the firm's CEO himself was calling Brent into his office, the file of evidence splayed out on the desk between them. "What is the meaning of this, Brent?" The CEO's voice could be heard saying sternly over the recording I had my hacker obtain. "This is utterly unacceptable behavior for one of our senior executives. Sir, I can explain." Brent stuttered, suddenly sounding very small. "Explain what?" the CEO interrupted sharply. "These photos, videos, all this proof of you carrying on illicit affairs and neglecting your responsibilities, using company property for your indecent trysts?" There was a pause, and I could practically see Brent squirming in discomfort. Good. Let him feel just an ounce of the shame and humiliation he deserved. "You're fired, effective immediately," the CEO stated, his voice laced with finality and disgust. "Security will escort you off the premises. I want you gone within the hour." The recording clicked off, and I felt a savage surge of satisfaction. That high-paying job, that status and sense of self-worth Brent derived from his career, all of it gone in an instant because of his own reprehensible actions. But I wasn't done by any means. No, this was just the start of his downfall. Next, I recruited Dylan's help to release the entire file across Brent's social media accounts and professional networking sites like LinkedIn. Within hours, the lurid details of his infidelity went viral as outraged friends, family, and colleagues shared and reacted in shock and horror. Amber's husband even reached out, thanking me profusely after discovering the truth about his wife's tawdry dalliances. Their divorce proceedings began immediately. As for Brent, his phone was blowing up constantly with anguished texts and voice messages from all corners of his life. Parents disowning him, friends cutting ties, colleagues aghast at his indecent behavior. In one particularly satisfying instance, I patched his mother's tearful tirade onto the house speakers so we could both savor every blistering second of it. "You were my pride and joy," the woman wept brokenly. "But now, you're nothing to me, nothing but a filthy, immoral disappointment." I could see it all clicking into place for Brent in that moment, the total and complete ruination I had meticulously orchestrated. His entire world was crumbling into ashes before his very eyes. When he finally looked up at me with naked fear and loathing, I simply smiled. "Like I told you before," I said calmly, "this is only the beginning of what you deserve." With Brent's career, reputation, and family ties in ruins, I turned my sights to obliterating what little he had left, his finances and assets. He would be left with nothing, forced to start from less than zero after the hell I put him through. It began with liquidating our joint accounts and investment portfolios that I had access to through our marriage. Hundreds of thousands of dollars drained in a matter of days, transferred discreetly to offshore holdings where he could never trace it. "What did you do?" Brent demanded frantically when he realized our nest egg was gone. "Where's all our money?" I simply smiled placidly. "Considering how I earned every penny of that while you were gallivanting with your whores, I'd say it's finders keepers." His face purpled with rage, but I was prepared for his outburst. With a flick of my wrist, I produced a crisp manila envelope, a dossier detailing every single asset in his name that I intended to systematically demolish. "This is just a taste of what's coming for you," I said coolly. "You're going to lose it all by the time I'm through." True to my word, I deployed every underhanded tactic in the book to unravel the few holdings Brent had managed to siphon away and hide from me. With Dylan's tech-savvy assistance, we relentlessly hacked and probed until we discovered every last possession he tried to salt away. The classic '68 Mustang he had lovingly restored? Reported as a stolen vehicle until it was seized. The private investment funds he had stashed overseas? Drained away by my hacker contacts until not a cent remained. Even the house he tried to rent after being forced from our marital home. I made sure the landlord received an anonymous tip that Brent was an adulterer of the worst kind. He was kicked out within a month. With each successive blow I landed, stripping away his assets and driving him towards bankruptcy, the fight seemed to gradually drain from Brent's body. What was once a sneering, arrogant puffery became a hunched, haggard shell of a man. He would call or text me at all hours, devolving from bitter threats to pathetic pleadings as his life crumbled around him. "Candace, please?" He sobbed one night during a tear-filled voicemail. "I'm so sorry for what I did. You have to stop this. I have nothing left. I'll be destitute." I listened to the message impassively before deleting it without a shred of remorse. Brent's suffering was a calculated, perfectly engineered campaign, and it was nowhere near finished. When his car was finally repossessed and his cell phone cut off for lack of payment, he started showing up at my doorstep, begging to be let inside. "I have nowhere to go," he wailed, pounding on the door with gnarly fists. "You've taken everything from me. Why are you doing this?" I watched him through the security camera, taking perverse satisfaction in his total and complete debasement. This was the great Brent Connors, the corporate hotshot and arrogant cheater, reduced to a sniveling, desperate husk. When Dylan emerged from his room to see what the commotion was, I waved him off. "Don't bother," I told my son calmly. "He's just reaping what he's sown. That's all." My final salvo came in the form of a massive data dump to the IRS. Records upon records of Brent's financial misdeeds, from tax evasion to money laundering. Within days, the authorities were at his ramshackle motel room with warrants and cuffs. The sight of his utter humiliation as they hauled him away almost made the entire grueling process worth it. Almost. Months passed as the full weight of my revenge campaign against Brent took hold. With each day that went by, he plummeted further into the abyss of destitution and ruin I had meticulously constructed. The corporate job, the money, the family, the home, it had all been systematically stripped away through my calculated efforts. Even his freedom was temporarily revoked after that IRS raid, though his high-priced lawyers managed to get the charges reduced to a slap on the wrist. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Brent was a shell of his former arrogant self, having lost every single thing that had once brought him swagger and self-worth. I savored every agonizing second as the proud, selfish man who had so callously shattered his marriage vows was ground down into broken submission. This was karma's bitter reward for his sins against me and our family. Dylan and I, meanwhile, were finally able to start fresh without the toxic weight of Brent's betrayal dragging us down. With my revenge complete and his own misdeeds having alienated him from everyone he knew, he was officially expunged from our lives like the cancer he was. We moved from our old home into a new place. A clean slate for just the two of us to begin rebuilding. Dylan seemed to thrive without his father's negative influence, excelling in school and landing a prestigious internship in software engineering. As for me, I had never felt more liberated and vindicated. The rage that had fueled my quest for vengeance had burned itself out, leaving only a sense of tranquility and peace in its wake. That is, until the incessant phone calls and unwanted visits began. At first, Brent's attempts to reach out were easy enough to ignore. Drunken voicemails pleading for mercy or hurling bitter curses that he had brought upon himself. I would simply delete the messages without a second thought. But then he started showing up in person, loitering outside our new home or accosting us in public with his disheveled, haunted appearance. Each time I saw that sunken, desperate look in his rheumy eyes, any lingering pity I might have felt quickly evaporated. I have nothing left because of you, he sobbed during one such confrontation outside the grocery store. You've destroyed me completely. Grabbing my arm with shocking force, Brent stared at me with an almost feral desperation. Please, give me another chance, he begged hoarsely. I'll do anything, Candace. Anything to get my life back. I could feel Dylan tense beside me, ready to intervene, but I simply wrenched my arm free of Brent's grasp and stared at him with utter contempt. Your life? I spat out a bitter laugh. This is exactly what you deserve after throwing away the life we had for some cheap fling. You did this to yourself. Brent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a savage glare. I gave you chance after chance to come clean, to make things right, I said, voice low and laced with venom. But you just couldn't stop lying and cheating, could you? You chose this path, and I made sure you suffered every agonizing step of the way. Straightening up, I turned and began walking back towards the car where Dylan waited, leaving Brent crumpled on the sidewalk like the pathetic, broken shell of a man he had become. As we drove off, I felt an immense weight finally lift from my shoulders. The long, arduous road towards justice and reclaiming my life had finally reached its conclusion. Brent was neutralized, relegated to a cautionary tale of how swiftly karma can dismantle even the proudest of narcissists. I looked over at Dylan, my strong, resilient son, and smiled. We had each other, and that was enough to forge ahead into our new chapter, free of Brent's toxicity at long last. No more looking back, only moving forward, towards the fresh start this long overdue vengeance had afforded us.